Hello, everyone, and I hope you've had a great week. I know it's a little late in the week for a fill-in video. We have a few verses to get through, and the reason that I wasn't able to get it done before now is that I didn't do it. So, at any rate, we don't have a lot of verses to get through, so we're in Luke chapter 14. Ben finished up this past weekend talking about the parable of the Great Supper, the Great Feast, and how in this parable, a master sends out an invitation to all these really important people. When the time comes for the party, the really important people all make excuses and won't come. So he invites the poor, the sick, and the lame from the city to the party, still not full. Then he sends his servant out into the highways and the hedges and outside of town to invite them into the party. And it's a picture of the fact that the religious authorities, Israel as a whole, will reject Jesus' invitation. But there are still those from within the city, those of Israel, that will accept his invitation and follow him. And then the invitation will also go outside the city, outside of Israel. So we think about Gentiles there. So Jesus is teaching this, and people are starting to follow him, and he wants them to understand what they're getting into when they make the choice to join him and to follow him. And so not only do we think about them then and the choice physically they made to follow him, but also we think today about our choice to follow Jesus. He's talking about discipleship here. So we're going to pick up in Luke chapter 14, verse 25. Got a few things here to say at the beginning, and then we'll move a little faster through the rest of it. But verse 25, now great multitudes went with him, and he turned and he said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Now we're going to pause. This obviously is a dramatic statement from Jesus. This is a pattern. We've noticed this, and we talk about this often, how when Jesus starts gathering crowds, he'll often turn to them and say something very dramatic, something with a lot of contrast to it, something very challenging, and it's a way of weeding out who's there for selfish reasons and who is there truly to follow him because they believe in him and they want to follow him. So another great example of this is after Jesus feeds the 5,000. And he feeds the 5,000, does this incredible miracle for them. He goes up on a mountain to pray. The disciples get in a boat. They go out on the water. Storm happens. He walks on the water. They go to the other side. Once they're on the other side, the next morning, the crowds make their way around the lake and they find him again. And Jesus looks at them and says, I know why you're here. You want breakfast. But unless you are willing to eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. And they say, this is a hard saying. And he's like, yeah, I know. So this is a pattern that Jesus uses, and he uses it here again. And he says, if you don't hate your father and mother, your brother and sister, you can't follow me. Now, does Jesus mean that we have to hate our family and our siblings or our parents? Well, of course not. That would be in contrast to pretty much the entire scripture and his teaching. He is using an intentional exaggeration here to draw a contrast and say, following me must be your top priority. You must prioritize it above all other things and be willing to lose all other things if it means that's what you have to do in order to follow me. And that's why he says what he says next as well. Verse 27, and whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, when we hear cross, we think of Jesus on the cross. They would not have thought of that, hadn't happened yet. So the cross was an instrument of torture or punishment. And so what they would have heard in this sense is, okay, I need to be willing to give up my family if that's necessary to follow Jesus because he's my top priority. But also I may have to give up my life as well in order to follow him. Are you willing to do that? That was the question to them. And I'm sure it weeded some people out. He says, verse 28, for which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider whether he's able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, Whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. So he's saying, truly, if you want to follow him, if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, you have to be willing to sacrifice anything in order to do that. It has to be your top priority. And so you need to know that. He's saying, wouldn't you count the cost before you build the building? Wouldn't you count the men before you go to war? That need to consider this and decide now before we follow him really closely. And that's the call of a child of God, is to follow Jesus and be his disciple. We need to make sure we are willing to do what it takes in order to follow him. So that's the question for you and me. Are we willing to make the sacrifices we need to make in order to prioritize his will and follow him? Verse 34, salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for land nor for the dunghill, but men throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. See, this is about being effective, like salt is effective at seasoning, us being effective as disciples and followers of Jesus. Okay, that brings us up to chapter 15, where Jesus is going to have an interaction with the Pharisees here and tell several very incredible and poignant stories to help show them that the attitude of their heart about people is not good. So that takes us to chapter 15, where we'll pick up this weekend. See you on Sunday.